Hi, everybody. This is Adam Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology. It's Sunday, June 23rd, and today we're going to talk about the T-square that's forming in the sky right now between Venus in the sign of Gemini, Jupiter in the sign of Sagittarius, and Neptune in the sign of Pisces. Now, this T-square has been forming repeatedly throughout the month, in fact, and so it's formed in a number of different ways because of the very slow-moving square between Jupiter and Neptune. So I'm going to go ahead and illustrate this for you so you can get a visual of it. Right now, here's Venus at 17 Gemini moving into an opposition with Jupiter at 17 Sagittarius and in a pretty close square with Neptune in the sign of Pisces. Now, that's not exact, right? But close enough. And in addition to that, of course, the moon today is in Jupiter's sign, in the sign of Pisces, moving into a conjunction with Neptune, which is sometimes known as the modern ruler of astrology. If you've heard me speak about astrology enough on my channel already, you'll know that I do not use outer planets as sign rulers. It's a long conversation. You've heard me talk about it before. I won't get into it. But at any rate, it's a very significant transit day because the moon is in Jupiter's sign. It thus has reception with Jupiter. That means it has the ability to receive favorable benefits from Jupiter today because it's aspecting Jupiter in a close square and it's in Jupiter's sign. It's as if I were going to go over to your house and hang out for dinner or to hang out and watch a movie or something, and I was like one of your favorite house guests. You were like, hey, I like it when you come here and I treat you well, as opposed to, I don't know who, someone else coming by and you're like, you kind of stink, like I don't like having you in my house. So this is good reception between the moon and Jupiter today. The other thing you need to know is that Jupiter is in what is called a superior square to the moon. This means that Jupiter is asserting dominance over the moon. It's a moon that's really going to kind of ring with the sound of Jupiter today. So it's a nice day because, it's also just genuinely or generally enjoyable when the benefics get together. And here we see again, Venus is also moving, as I'm doing this video, into the opposition with Jupiter. It's like a benefic sandwich, basically, and the moon's kind of getting in on it, on the action as well. And even, all the way through this evening and tomorrow, the moon will be, for a little bit, in what's called benefic enclosure. That's when the moon actually gets in between the rays of Venus and Jupiter by degree. Let me see if I can actually show you what that looks like. It's kind of cool. All right, I'm going to turn this wheel for a second. Don't want to make you dizzy, but here it goes. Now, what we're going to see here is at the moment that the moon starts moving in between the rays of Jupiter, right, at 1748, and Venus at 1817, they're going to pass each other by this evening. Once the moon gets into that range, which is going to happen, we'll start advancing it by minutes so you can see how this happens. Once the moon gets past Jupiter at 47, right? Okay, now the moon's ray of 1748 falls in between 1747 and 1819, and there are no other planets that cast their ray in between that space. So that's called the benefic enclosure. Happens tonight around 10:03 p.m. and it lasts. We'll keep going like this. It's going to be like an hour, so I might as well advance it by an hour. It's going to go along like this all the way up until about 11:22. So actually a little bit earlier than that. So what does that mean? It means tonight between, say 10 o'clock and midnight, just to keep it keep it broad. It's a really nice window. It's a really nice window in what is sometimes called electional astrology. Electional astrology is when you pick a time or date to do something specific and you hope to get a good outcome by virtue of the kind of astrology that is in the air at the time. It's a very complicated topic, and I'm oversimplifying things to tell you that this would just unanimously be some kind of good moment to do something. But that being said, I wouldn't be surprised if this evening, later in the evening, sort of generally there was a good email that, some good news that came in, an interesting business opportunity, just a nice time with friends that's being had. It just has the feeling of something that's really benefic. Main reason for this is, again, there's a predominance of Venus-Jupiter energy, both of which were traditionally the planets of good fortune. And it's also the moon and Neptune are in the sign of Jupiter, which is the planet, the great benefic. So everything sounds pretty rosy, right? And it certainly can be. One thing that we have to remember is that Gemini and Sagittarius and Jupiter altogether, or Pisces altogether, activate the signs of 2 signs of Jupiter and 1 sign of Mercury. When we take that into consideration, what we're looking at is a kind of Jupiter-Mercury moment as well. So sometimes that will mean that the rational mind and, say, the spirit of abundance, which don't always go together. Like if Mercury's thinking very carefully, he's probably not, drinking a pitcher of ale, right? Like if Mercury has a problem to solve, he's not probably like, losing his mind at a dance party. You know what I mean? So, or if Mercury's skeptical, it's hard for Mercury to have faith that Jupiter is more prone to do. There's these kind of basic archetypal distinctions between Jupiter and Mercury that are underlying this moment. But because Venus and Jupiter in this opposition, generally speaking, it's a good kind of opposition. There may be some tension around mental, intellectual, verbal exchanges, faith-based perspectives or political perspectives that may not be entirely cohesive, and yet they may interestingly find some kind of union today. So look for interesting forms of philosophical, ideological, political, intellectual union, maybe in a slightly unlikely place, or in a place that might normally there may be more butting of heads. You could find some interesting forms of collaboration, partnership, agreement. The other thing that's comes through when Venus and Jupiter comes through is growth. Just generally speaking, the spirit of growth, abundance. Things tend to grow with Venus and Jupiter. Both planets are related to the qualities in nature that grow things. So, for example, in ancient astrology, Venus is warm and moist, and so is Jupiter, both of which are associated to the conditions necessary for plants to grow. That was very important in the ancient world in terms of understanding, agricultural, the cycles of crops and plants. Astrology was used to make sure that we knew, if there was going to be, feast or famine. So we have this built-in sense of the benefic planets bringing growth. Now, not all growth is good growth. So there is a shadow side to this transit between Venus and Jupiter today. We're going to talk about Neptune in a minute, but Venus and Jupiter, their part in this, the shadow side would be indulgence, where things go to an extreme or things become excessive. Not all of our desires are healthy, even the ones that we think are really noble or virtuous. Sometimes more of a good thing becomes a bad thing. You know what I mean? So you have to be careful of that with Venus opposite Jupiter. You also have to be careful of, just excessiveness, grandiosity, bigness, thinking too big, planning too big. Is that saying, don't go to the grocery store when you're hungry. A spiritual teacher of mine was talking about this recently, and it just, it reminded me of the fact that he said, one of the things that he said that I so agree with was, if you don't go out, if you go into a situation where you're vulnerable, let's say to being indulgent or to going to extremes somehow, or to, for example, if you know that you're easily charmed by someone who isn't very good for you, then you want to be maybe careful if you go out on a date with them, that you have sort of, really given yourself a good pep talk so that you don't get lost, right? How many times have you, ended up in a relationship with someone because they're charming, because they're physically or the chemistry is just right, but, they're just awful for you. You know what I mean? So you have to be careful of Venus and Jupiter kind of wining and dining and charming you and sort of tickling your fancy, but not being good for you, so you need to be careful about that. But one of the things that my spiritual teacher was saying was, if you know that you're going to go out into a world that is ready-made to tempt you, and not always with the big stuff either, not like here's a heroin needle or something, like some, but little things like, maybe I'll just have that, extra cup of coffee, and then you're just fried, or maybe I'll just, spend that extra amount of money, and then, the rest of the month, the budget's tight. This is little stuff that a lot of the times we go to some extreme, and it's not necessarily a huge extreme, it's a little extreme. How do we prepare ourselves for meeting that out in the world? Well, one of the things, again, one of my spiritual teachers was saying was that it boils down to whether or not in the morning, when you've first woken up, you've taken the time to do your spiritual practices. Do you put them at the very foundation of every day? Because then when you go out in the world, it's like, well, my spiritual practices for the day are done. I've taken care of the most important thing today. And then when I go out into the world, whatever it is that I face, whatever, comes my way, especially the little things that may take me off in extreme ways, I'm more aware of them because I've taken care of myself first. Yeah, eat your meal before you go to the grocery store. Do your spiritual thing before you go out into the world and get bombarded with little things that can take you off track in a big way. Venus in Gemini are the little things, the little things that can call or catch your attention. Venus in Mercury's sign is like all the things that glitter, the multiplicity of glittering things in the world that catch our eye. And some of them are truly attractive. It's very youthful and enthusiastic. Like my daughter, when we go for walks in the state park near where we live, she'll find the most interesting things that my eyes just don't look for, because in some ways, like I'm off in like adult world with all sorts of, heavy concerns, and I'm just happy to like breathe and not think about them for a little bit. Meanwhile, my daughter is in some kind of fairy world, you know what I mean? And she's just delighting in all of these shining things. So similarly, Venus in Gemini has a kind of youthful, curious, constantly discovering the shining things of the world energy. And that's good. And so right now you could stumble upon small things that turn into amazingly delightful, wonderful things. Small disagreements that turn into surprising spaces of collaboration. You could, so this is sort of the beautiful thing. Small things become big things in a good way. But it's also possible for it to be like, hey, how about just this one little thing? And it's not very good for you, but it's just this one little thing. If you're a sugar addict, for example, like I would call my wife a sugar addict. She's not really, but she was. So for her, it's like a piece of chocolate, just a little piece of chocolate. You know what I mean? That's just a little piece, and then she's gone. And then before you know it, she's like a squirrel. I'm like finding hidden chocolate bars. And she thinks it makes a difference because they're organic. So at any rate, these are the things that, and I'm no better. Like I have my own set of, we all are like that, right? There's little things that we have that totally take us off track. The devil's in the details. You know what I mean? So be careful of the sparkling twins running around right now, tempting us to do something that's way bigger and more delusional than we think it is, with Neptune in the mix as well. All right, so that's the light and dark side of it. But on the other hand, something that's really interesting to think about is the presence of Neptune in all of this. Neptune adds something that's transcendental, that's romantic, that's otherworldly. I was thinking about it last night, and I was driving home from Harinam, which is a Kirtan that I was doing downtown Silver Spring, and I had received a whole bunch of garland flowers that the Hare Krishna singers put on me, and I was like walking home, and some guy came up to me, and he was like, "What, did you just win a race?" And I was like, for a second, I was like, "Oh yeah, I've got flowers on me." And he said, and I said, "Oh no." And he said, "Well, where did you get them from?" And I said, "Oh yeah, you know what Kirtan is? The Hare Krishnas?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Yeah, I was singing Kirtan, and yeah, they gave me some flowers." And he said, "Ah, what did they want in return?" Like so cynical. And I go, nothing. They just wanted me to sing along. You know? And he just looked at me like, huh? Um, there is this, and so anyway, on the way home, I was driving home and I was listening to Jai Uttal. I don't know if you guys know who Jai Uttal is, but I really like Jai Uttal's music. And he's he's a kirtaniya, and he sings kirtan, and he's just, there's a beautiful way of making music and devotional bhakti music. So at any rate, he was singing about Radha, who is the divine consort of Krishna and the sort of feminine aspect of God in the bhakti tradition. And, it represents like the internal potency of God, the pleasure potency of divinity. And in that sense, she is the ultimate sort of paramour or lover of divinity. And so she's like the, sort of like personified love of God. And it's this really romantic mood. And I was listening to Jai Uttal chant the name of Radha in this really beautiful composition. And I was just taken away. And I realized, everything in my life, that I've always been a romantic. I've been a writer, a musician. I was just loved art when I was in theater. And like I've always just been a, kind of a hopeless romantic. And I love poetry and all this. So, and myth and image too are hugely important to me. So I was thinking about all of this as I was going home, and I was realizing, as I was hearing the names of Radha being chanted, I was thinking everything in my life that's romantic and beautiful, that is not rooted in my desire for something selfish, right? That's not rooted in like, what am I going to get? Or like, what am I afraid of that I don't want? And all of the ways that my desires and fears kind of manipulate me like a puppet. But when I'm just purely in a space of feeling in love with the universe, feeling in love with life, feeling in love that I have a soul, feeling in love with people and the goodness in people. When I'm in that space and I have that romantic mood, right? I was realizing like it's actually, I'm tapping into a transcendental pantheon of entities and beings, kind of all personified by Radha, who just love God. They just see God in everything and just love God. And I was like, wow, that's so amazing. And I was just so taken by it, right? Ended up after the kids went to bed, I laid on my bed and I put my headphones on and I was listening to this song over and over again, which I'm putting a link to, by the way, in the YouTube description, so you can listen to this song if you want. It's really beautiful. And I was just taken away by it, and I ended up doing something I hadn't done for a really long time. I put a song on repeat. I don't know if you guys have ever done this, but like it took me back to being like 16. Because it's been a long time since I've just sat down and like put anything on repeat and just been like, I must listen to this over and over and over again. It's so beautiful. I just want to be taken away by it and just drift into this transcendental space of sort of divine sentiment. So at any rate, I put the song on repeat and just kept listening to it. And I was so taken by it. I went to bed and I was just thinking, I remember when I was a kid, and all of that romantic energy was really pointed directly at all of my worldly concerns. Was I popular? Oh, so angsty, like it's like 8th grade, 9th grade. Just, oh, do people like me? Do I look good? Do I have the right clothing? Do I fit in? All the stuff that we worry about when we're kids. And then a little bit older, it was like, the girls, do I have a girlfriend? Does she like me? Is it, yeah, just all this kind of angsty. So the romantic in me felt all of the same feelings, was so taken by so many of the same feelings that I was feeling as I laid there last night thinking about Radha. But as I've aged, obviously, I've learned that pointing those feelings and those emotions and that sense of being captured by something, pointing it towards God, pointing it towards divinity, pointing it towards yoga, pointing it towards something transcendental, sure is a lot more secure and stable and blissful than pointing it to things in the world that last like 2 seconds, like oh my God, the bliss of like a huge like ice cream sundae or something. It makes, or my wife would disagree when it comes to the chocolate, but you get what I'm saying. And I just had this moment of appreciation thinking, so many people in this world are romantics. So many people are hopeful. So many people are optimists. But by nature, we are that way. But one of the reasons that we don't end up enjoying the sustained taste of being a person like that, of being a romantic, is that we channel all of those feelings into the wrong things. We just channel them into the wrong things. This is in some ways the difference between Neptune getting in on the Venus-Jupiter opposition right now in a healthy way and an unhealthy way. Neptune in the midst of this Venus-Jupiter dynamic says, fall in love with something, just be taken by something. But is it the right thing? You know what I mean? Is it a dream? Is it an illusion? Is it a fantasy that's just going to lead you to a cavity? Or is it, or I'm sorry, I just keep thinking about my wife and her hidden chocolate. Or is it something that's taking us home, taking us to our spiritual center? So if we think about it every day, like I think about my wife, and one of the reasons that it makes my heart so glad to think about her, craving her chocolate or whatever, is because there's a secret love in her heart. And it's like she really loves chocolate. We're not going to lie about that. So, but the truth is that same love, that secret like delight that we all take in something, if we find a way of putting that into spiritual energy, spiritual association, then all of that sweetness, all of that romantic energy, it gets to taste something that doesn't go away. And I think that's the real spiritual message of this transit. So I wanted to share it with all of you today. And in the meantime, I will also wish that you all receive maybe some good news, or that just things go nicely today in general, because it's a nice reprieve after some of the intensities of the Mars-Mercury opposition to Saturn and Pluto, right? We've got eclipse season coming. We might as well have at least a couple of days here with, where we can be captured by something. Because the reason that we keep falling in love with life over and over again, the reason that we are romantics when it comes to living our own lives, that we're not just, walking off cliffs like lemmings because it's so hard, right? Why do we keep doing it? It's because somewhere we fall in love. We become secret lovers of our own drama. It's hard to admit it because everyone wants to say that the good stuff is the stuff that comes after the difficult stuff, the painful events. Well, it's the stuff that comes after the pain that we like. But actually, those of us who endure life enough, and probably most people who love astrology, the reason that we stick around and end up finding something of deep value in this human experience is because our soul gets involved and we find transcendental romance. Our life becomes epic and beautiful. We fall in love with it. We become secret chocolate eaters of our own lives, And I think that astrology helps us do that by remembering that behind every event, painful or not, there are planets moving in the sky. Sometimes we can't see them because it's just the sun. And the sun just shines and we think this is just it. It's just my everyday life. But every time when the sun goes down and the stars come up and there's just millions of stars and the light of the moon, if we take a moment to pause, reflect, look up, if we take a moment every day to do the same thing by studying the astrology, we can remember these greater stories that we're held by that are moving through us all the time. And then this, it's like finding your stashed away chocolate. So, okay, that's what I've got for you guys today. I hope you have a great Sunday. Take care.